Willkommen in einem anderen Aufregungsvideo, or welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 3 of my Napoleon at War example game series. Napoleon at War is a series of board games published by SBI back in the 1970s. This video uses a figure game version of these rules. Because the rules are so simple, videos describing how to play are of minimal benefit. Thus, most of my videos concerning these rules are to do with examples of play. This example of play was used to design the scenario system that I currently use for both these rules, that is Napoleonic, and also for Schwerpunkt, which is my World War II and Cold War conversion of a SPI board game. The force mixes are randomly selected, which is a possible issue but does add a bit of spice. The attackers spin a 3, which is an average attacker's roll. 3 core arrive on game turn 1 and 2 core on game turn 6. For the defender, they also spin a 3, which is also an average roll. 2 core are on the playing area at the beginning of the game, and 1 core arrives on game turn 2 and 2 core on game turn 6. Some of the options provide an advantage and some a disadvantage. I possibly may need to consider creating a handicap system when certain combinations arise, but the differences are pretty minor. In most cases, the game lasts for 12 game turns, but if no reinforcements arrive on game turn 9, by either side, then it ends on game turn 9. In my playtesting, extending the game when no reinforcements arrive, or when one side is clearly not more powerful than the other, results in a rather boring game, and there is almost no movement, thus the quicker end. While these charts do not show it, the playing area is played along the long axis using this combination. Other combinations require play along the short axis, and others allow the defender to decide exactly which axis to use. This shows my core, or at least my standard core, which I'll be using in this playtest game. I'm not using any optional rules, so each element is 1 strength point and costs 1 point for deployment purposes. Thus a core equals 12 points for deployment purposes. Optional rules allow you to field inferior and superior troops with corresponding differences in strength points and additional points or less points to deploy those type of troops. The defender in this case, which as you can see are Prussian, get 2 core on the playing area, 1 on game turn 3 and 2 on game turn 6. The attacker gets 3 core on game turn 1 and 2 core on game turn 6. All my cores are basically organised in a similar manner: 9 infantry elements, 2 cavalry elements and 1 artillery element. The playing area that I'll be using is my custom Waterloo playing area. This shows the playing area based on the SPI board game of the Waterloo battle. I'm using unique terrain, that is area terrain, and actually just randomly placed it on the playing area without much thought. I have a deployment system which does work and is reasonable, but I still find it sometimes easier to just randomly create something which just looks right, and then allow my opponent to decide which edge they want to come in, or whichever. The key points are the 3 objectives, which will be on the main road running along the long axis of the playing area in this case. This shows the defender's right flank position across the playing area. The town, which is in the centre and on the road, and which can be seen on the left here, has 3 elements in it, and is one of the key objectives for victory points purposes. This shows the defender's left flank, with the objective that you saw in the previous slide in the red circle on the right here. In my previous games, about 2 or 3, I was the defender, and I defended the first objective and did rather well, with the attacker rarely taking the second objective. Now that we flipped sides, my opponent decided to do the same. But as I was now the attacker, I now decided to go in to change my strategy a bit and decide to go for an all-out attack, because as I was the defender in the previous couple of games, I actually understood how precarious my position was in the heat of the attacker's attack. So my strategy basically was that if I could just push the defenders to breaking point, I'd be able to break through. The attackers are coming in from the right edge, the defenders' edge is on the left. This shows the location of the previous 2 pictures or slides. The defenders have decided to defend all 3 objectives in order to try for a major victory. Actually, even if they did not defend the first objective, whatever happens, the attacker will always force the defender back some distance. So a forward defence is almost certainly essential if you want to hold the centre objective. The real question is how forward should that defence be? I've actually come to the conclusion for the defender to defend the first objective is pointless. They mainly need to focus on selecting the correct forward position that will allow them to defend the second or central objective. While it's unlikely, if the defender can hold onto the objective on the attacker's edge, the defender will win an overwhelming or decisive victory. However, because of the force mix and reinforcement schedule, this, while not impossible, this is extremely unlikely. The more likely result is to ensure the central objective is never taken, which will result in a defender's marginal victory, and a victory, whether marginal or decisive, is still a victory. The victory conditions are very simple in this scenario, but after trying lots of complex systems, I find simplicity drives behaviour more effectively than convoluted and complex victory conditions. At least that's my position at the present moment. On game turn 1, the attacker moves their 3 core onto the playing area. I decided to run a core along the road for a single low odds attack. While it's unlikely to succeed, if I had spun a 1, it would have caused the defender's line to be severely compromised. There is no downside to this attack if conducted correctly, or actually only a very minor downside, but as we'll discover, I didn't conduct it correctly. In retrospect, I forgot I had to attack everything within a base width, or the combat zone of control, so the odds ended up being 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 2. However, I could have brought the artillery element up to the rear and moved the odds back to a 1 to 2. The strategy was correct, but unfortunately my execution in this case was slightly lacking. The attackers attack with 3 against 8. 3 of the defenders are doubled, and I span a 3. The result is AR, so I was quite lucky. If I had spun a 6 or a 5, it would have been a disaster, or not very good. One issue of a simpler game system, a simple error can be significant. A complex game system minimises this because in a complex game system, most players really have no idea what they're doing and don't even know that they're conducting an error or a brilliant move. And also, when they get confused, they just wing it. So this kind of oscillation of results tend to be lesser. Unfortunately, that's probably not a good thing. So I think I probably prefer having a simple system where I can understand if something's an error or not. During the defender's player turn, the defender adjusts its line, moving forces, defending the left flank towards the centre, as that's where all the action's going to occur. Because none of the defenders are in any zone of control, the defenders have the freedom to move their elements in any particular way they so desire. Game turn 1 is completed and game turn 2 begins. There are no reinforcements in game turn 2. On game turn 2, the attack fully closes into contact with the defender's front line as much as possible. I'm experimenting with markers showing the movement zones controls of various units, and I must admit it's working rather well. In this game I created additional ones and used them fairly extensively to identify where I had to attack and where I didn't have to worry about attacking, and it really did simplify gameplay dramatically. So the attackers, or the Austrian forces, launched their first attack on game turn 2, 6 versus 3, resulting in a 2 to 1 attack. A 6 is spun and the result is, oh no, an AR. Very poor initial luck. Another point about simple game systems, a die roll can be rather significant. However, as long as there is enough die rolls, this luck factor can be minimised. The next attack using the Austrian cavalry is at a 1 to 2. A 1 is spun and the defender retreats and loses 1 element. This is unusually good luck. Incidentally, the reason why it's 1 to 2 is the defender cavalry was in a town, so they're doubled. Next attack, 6 against 3. The defenders are doubled. I spun a 3 and the result is DR. Very expected. Next attack, 7 against 3. I spun a 3 and the result is yet another DR. Very much expected. Next attack, 4 against 2. Spun a 1 and the result is DR with a D1. Now this is a very good attack. Good luck on my part. In this attack it's 4 against 2. I spun a 6 resulting in AR. Not good luck. In this attack it's 6 against 3. Defenders are doubled, resulting in a 1-to-1 attack. A 1 is spun and the result is a DR and D1, another good attack. This shows the final position at the end of the attacker player turn 2. The first objective town has effectively been taken by the attackers. During the defender's movement phase, he adjusts his forces and then has to conduct his compulsory attacks. First attack, 2 against 2, defenders are doubled, a 6 is spun, resulting in AR and A1. This is a very bad start to the attacks. In the next attack, it's 3 against 3, defenders are once again doubled, a 6 is spun, resulting in yet another AR, A1. This is also a very bad attack, but it's not really unexpected. In this game system, the real art is to force the defender into poor odds attacks, which is exactly what occurred for those 2 attacks. Next attack, 4 against 2, defender doubled because it's in a town, a 4 is spun and the result is an AR. The town is now truly under control of the attackers at the end of game turn 2. This was a bit of a surprise as the town had fallen on game turn 3 in all our previous games. Next attack, 5 against 3, and a 1 is spun, resulting in a DR. At the end of game turn 2, this is the front line. The first objective has been taken, giving the attacker 1 VP. One aspect of the game is its chess-like nature. When attacking, you need to visualise each combat and the probabilities to either try and surround and eliminate enemy units, which is not possible here, or to force the enemy to conduct poor odds attack in their combat phase, which is definitely the case here. The probability matrix is too complex to really visualise by any normal human being, but you do start to develop some basic rules. One rule is to always keep a small reserve in case you need to improve the odds of a counterattack in a strategic spot. The other rule is an attack cannot be half-hearted. It's either 100% or 0%. Finally, in a game system such as this, forming up your forces for a perfect attack will never end well. You'll simply waste too much time. I knew this from playing the board game, not from playing this figure gaming version, but the same rules definitely do apply. We now move to game turn 3. The defender gets reinforcements during this player turn, 1 core. It's now the attacker's movement phase, and the attacker continues their all-out attack. This shows all the opposing units in contact with each other. This gives you a good example. I've tried to lock all defending forces in place. Apart from the artillery and non-involved forces on the left, the entire defender's forces are locked in movement zones control. If I can maintain this after the combat, the defender has no ability to respond to any critical sector. Let's start with the attacks. 2 against 1, I spun a 3, resulting in a DR. Next, a larger attack. 8 versus 2, I spun a 4, resulting in a DR. Third attack. 3 against 3, I spun a 6, resulting in attacker retreat and attacker loses 1 element. Not a good result, but eventually I was going to have to spin a bad die roll. While the loss of an element is not good, these defenders will be free to move during their game turn, which is really the major issue with this. It's the AR that was more important than the loss of the element. Next attack, it's 6 versus 2, and I spun a 1, resulting in a DR, or defender retreat, and D1, or defender loses 1 element. A reasonably good result. During the next attack, it's 3 versus 3, I spun a 1, resulting in, once again, a DR and a D1. Another very good spin. As we move along, it's a 3 versus 1, and the die roll is 6, resulting in an AR. At the end of the attacker player turn 3, this shows the front line, or the defender's movement zone control line. The defender only has 4 elements which can be moved, which limits the defender's ability to respond. It would have been great if I could have locked those 3 units, 3 elements in a zone control as well, but you can't have all the luck on your side in any particular game turn. The defender receives a core of reinforcements on game turn 3, which the defender rushes forwards as quickly as possible. As reinforcements arrive in a column, one after the other, the cavalry are leading as they can make a difference on game turn 4. The other elements are further behind because they're infantry. Incidentally, your movement is doubled on a road, which is why the road is so important. Back at the front line, during the defender's movement and combat phase, the defender attempts to solidify his front line but is forced into a series of attacks at unfortunate odds. For the first combat, I forgot to take the photo before the combat, but the first attack was at 1 to 2, a 6 was spun, and the result was AR A1. The attacking cavalry element is eliminated and the defenders advance after combat. This is a break in the defender's line, and as the attacker moves next, not a good thing. Single element units represent a very risky defensive line. For the next attack, it's 3 versus 3, a 2 is spun, and the result is DR or defender retreat. For the next attack, it's 3 versus 3, I spun a 3, and the result is DR again. For the next attack, it's 3 versus 6, a 4 is spun, and the result is AR. Quite expected. Now we come to the final attack, it's 1 versus 2, a 1 is spun, and the result is DR. Actually a very good result for the defender. This shows the position at the end of game turn 3, and you can see here the defender's line is close to totally breaking down. We now move on to game turn 4. There are no reinforcements in this game turn. The attacker now conducts its movement, forming up for a new full assault along the entire defender's line. Because of the break on the defender's right flank, the attackers have outflanked the defender's line and have surrounded a defending unit. This is not a good result for the defenders. We'll do our critical attack. The attacker attacks the surrounded units with 9 strength points versus 3. They spin a 3 and the result is DR. The unit is eliminated. This is a major disaster. For the next attack, it's 3 versus 3 and a 6 is spun. The result is AR and A1. Another 3 versus 3 and once again a 6 is spun. AR and A1. I suppose a good luck can't be expected to last forever, but 2 6s and 1 3 is certainly not average luck. This time it's 6 versus 3 and oh no, another 6 is spun. We get another AR. Now we've got 3 6s and a 3. Now we launch another attack, 4 against 2, and a 1 is spun. The result is DR and D1. It's probably expected, but we've got quite a bit of oscillation. This shows you the example of how luck is minimised if you spin enough die rolls. I'm doing quite well in this game turn, yet I've spun 3 6s in a row, which would be considered as extremely bad luck, but I'm still advancing. For the final attack, we have 3 versus 1 and I spin a 4. Result is DR. This shows the front line at the end of the attacker's combat phase in game turn 4. The defender's right flank has completely collapsed. Luckily for the defenders, a corps has arrived as reinforcements and is used to form up a new front line. Oh, I forgot, there's still some more attacks on the defender's left flank. In this attack, it's 1 versus 1, a 5 is spun and the result is AR. In this case, it's 3 versus 3 and a 6 is spun. The result is AR and A1. Not very lucky for the defender. This shows the front line at the end of game turn 4. The defender is just holding but has been forced to withdraw back to a position just in front of the central objective. This is a bit of a shock to the defender as this is not what had occurred in the previous 2 test games. Using a Marengo analogy, this is similar to the defeat of the initial French position, but with probably higher losses. We now move into game turn 5. The game turn track is from another scenario, so ignore the night game turns. This game lasts for 9 game turns and is occurring, let's say, in summer, which has long days. So we will encounter no night game turns in this scenario. The attackers move and continue their assault on the defender's front line. The objective is the red topped town in the bottom of the screen. The attacker needs to take this objective and hold it at the end of the game for victory. First attack, 2 against 1 and a 1 is spun. The results in AR A1. The line is broken again. Very little the defender could have done. They simply lacked the forces to have a 2-element unit in this position. For the next attack, it's 6 versus 2 and a 3 is spun. The result is DR. For the next attack, it's 4 versus 2 and a 3 is spun. The result is DR again. Another 2 to 1, 4 versus 2 and a 4 is spun. The result is, once again, a DR. And yet another 2 to 1, 4 versus 2 and a 4 is spun. The result is, guess what, a DR. Another 2 to 1, 2 versus 1 and a 6 is spun. The result is AR. Oh, a different result. The defender conducts movement. They certainly did have a reasonable number of units that they could move around to form up their front line, and this shows the position at the end of the defender's movement phase. The defender has to attack in these three spots. First attack is 3 versus 3 and a 1 is spun. It's a DR-D1. This is a good result for the defender. For the next attack it's 3 versus 3 and a 3 is spun. The result is DR. For the next result, or combat, it's 3 versus 3 and a 6 is spun. The result is AR, A1. Not so good. This shows the front line at the end of game turn 5. We now enter game turn 6. Both sides receive 2 cores of reinforcement in this game turn. While the defenders will have a total of 5 core against the attacker's 5 core, the losses suffered by the defenders are significant, and it's unlikely they can push back any of the attacker's gains, so the high water mark of the attacker is critical. If the attacker can take the central objective, they will end up with 4 VPs, which give them a victory, only a marginal, but a win is a win. Viewing the playing area from the attacker's edge, this shows the attacker's forces after its movement phase. 2 new cores are coming up as reinforcements on the right, but in order to win, the attacker cannot wait for them and must continue to drive forward as hard as it possibly can. For the first attack, it's 2 versus 1. The defender is doubled, a 2 is spun, and the result is DR. For the next attack, it's 6 versus 3, and a 2 is spun. The result is DR again. We now have a lower odds attack, 3 versus 3, and a 1 is spun. The result is DR, D1. This is a good result for the attacker. We now have a 6 versus 3, a 4 is spun, and the result is DR. Another 2 to 1 attack, 4 versus 2, and a 5 is spun. The result is AR. In this case, we have 4 versus 2, and a 5 is spun. The result is AR again. Not so lucky on this particular flank, unfortunately. We now have a 2 versus 2. The defenders is doubled, so the odds 1 to 2, but the player spins a 1, which is a result of DR. Very good luck. This shows the front line at the end of the attacker's game turn 6 player turn. The defender has about half of its forces in a movement zone of control and is locked in place. There are some elements available to provide some flexibility, but not very much. My blow-by-blow account will stop now as the game got a bit tense and I forgot to take enough pictures in order to give us a good view of what actually occurred. While I lack enough pictures to show the entire defender's player turn, what you can see here in the box, the critical objective. If the attacker can take this at any time, it automatically gets a draw. If it can take it and keep it, it becomes a victory. What occurred here is during the defender's player turn, these 2 elements plus the artillery to the rear had to attack the attackers. They spun a 5, which meant they had to retreat. This meant the attackers took the town. So at the end of game turn 6, the attacker had taken control of the central objective and managed to hold it against the counterattacks on game turn 7, 8 and the last counterattack by a defender which no longer had to worry about its front line on game turn 9. I'll be the first to admit the defender could have been lucky and taken the town on, let's say, game turn 7 and 8, but it seemed likely they would have been able to hold it. Thus, the most critical counterattack was game turn 9, and that's what they really failed. The remaining 3 game turns consisted basically of both players pumping everything they had into the critical central objective area, and as it turned out, the attacker just managed to hold on to achieve a victory. This was generally a surprise, as our previous thoughts were with this force mix it was impossible to achieve an attacker's victory, or so difficult as to be almost impossible. This is a part of the reason why I wanted to swap players around and keep on playing or playtesting this scenario to confirm if this was the case. It was not the case. My current thoughts is the defender should not attempt to hold the objective closest to the attacker's edge and defend slightly further back in possibly a better defensive position. However, I'm uncertain if that would really work. In the end, the losses suffered by the defenders was considered as the critical factor, and defending in a manner to reduce losses possibly would help more. How to do this is a moot point, but the attacker victory was only just achieved, and I feel the most likely outcome for this scenario at this moment is a draw. A couple of observations about scenarios. Once players really understand how to play a scenario, the attractiveness of the scenario does drop. When I played board game competitions, I knew about 24 different board games so well I could play them in my sleep. I no longer enjoyed playing these games, and the sole focus was on defeating my opponent. If my opponent was a novice, this was simple. If not, I just had to ensure I avoided any errors. In retrospect, the greatest joy I had in these board games was in learning how to play the scenarios, trying different strategies, different opponents, and then coming down to the tactic which suited my play style the best. If it worked in a competition, no change was required. If I failed, then I went back to the drawing board. This is similar to any game. For computer games, the greatest joy was always in learning how to beat the system. Once you were on top, the games quickly became less interesting. Thus, a scenario generally only has a specific lifespan, after which you need to try something different. This is part of the reason why I adopted a 36 different force mix combination scenario build system. Coupled with different terrain, there should be sufficient challenge to keep a player engaged for a long time. Historical scenarios are an issue as the force mix and terrain is fixed, so they tend to have a shorter lifespan, but they're still interesting in their own right. Now, some rules, such as DBN, overcome this by resembling chess more than a board game or a figure game. The challenge is to manoeuvre your elements around in such a manner to gain an advantage and win, at least for experienced players. Coupled with this is the breadth of troop types which are available, which can take a player many games to understand all possible combinations and their expected outcomes. Now, for those interested, you can download the rules from the Kriegspiel.io group site or download the original SPI board game, which I'll have links at the end of this video, and create your own rules. Based on the playtesting, the rules are up to version 2.1, but the changes only consist of clarification to the existing rules, specifically how to retreat after combat and advance after combat. My next project is to create a playing area for Wagram and try the Wagram scenario. I'll also try the Waterloo scenario, as I've actually created the playing area for that battle, which is what I used in this video. But my videos on this subject will probably end at this point. I may create some additional training videos, but the rules are so simple I suspect it would be a waste of time. Another observation I wish to make as I've been testing different game systems. All the board game conventions that I played required a very specific game turn limit and carefully crafted reinforcement schedules to give you a game which kept you on the edge of your seat. This is common in probably all good board games, but it's not normally what occurs in a traditional figure game. Many traditional figure games have, for all intents and purposes, unlimited game turns. For example, a game turn of 30 minutes per game turn means a game will last for about 24 game turns. Unless this is a very small game, that is not many elements, or covers many days to play, this basically means the number of game turns are unlimited because you'll never get to the end of your 24 game turns in a single day. Now, I have to admit there are figure game rules with game turn lengths of 60 minutes or greater, but they are rare. Now, both systems work, but it's a different mindset which takes some getting used to. So then the question is, where does the excitement come from in a traditional figure game? The answer is detail. Weapon ranges and types, troop morales and unique capabilities, and in some rules manoeuvring your elements around to gain some sort of advantage. In a board game, that level of detail is normally stripped away, and in its place you have a very specific time limit and a finely balanced reinforcement schedule. Both kind of philosophies work quite well, and they certainly meet a need, but there is a difference between the two, and it's important to understand that if you're going to try and simulate a full battle using figures, because you're going to have to move into the board game mindset in order to do that. Now, in terms of victory conditions are critical for board game style of rules, but in reality victory conditions are critical for any kind of rules, and this is not a real difference. However, with traditional figure game rules, often the victory conditions are downplayed or ignored. In a board game style, victory conditions are such an important focus that there is no way that you can ignore it. Without victory conditions, there is little point in playing a board game style set of rules. While a figure game set of rules, which never actually ends in a day, you can actually still have quite an enjoyable game without actually ever needing to worry about victory conditions. Now, of course, I keep on making this differentiation between board game style and figure gaming style. There are many pure figure gaming sets of rules on the market now, which could really be classed very similar to board game sets of rules. Now, the reason actually is simple: a desire to refight a historical battle in a reasonable time frame. In summary, there is no way you can refight Borodino within a day if you're worried about forming squares. So sets of rules have to move to a different plane, similar to a board game, in order to achieve that. So we come to a close of my part 3 of my Napoleon at War example game. For those interested, this game took 2.5 hours to play, 9 game turns. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.